Okay, making sure that everything's fine. Good morning. Welcome to this next of our Identity and Access Management webinar series. It's Thursday, May 28th, 9 a.m. We started with this series from LSEC about 2 months ago when the coronavirus outbreak basically made us stay at home. Today we are being released from home and we are allowed to go back to office. We can see that also business and production is slowly picking up speed again. But still we think it makes sense for us to continue with these webinars, since we know that it actually impacts people, supports them in their day-to-day activities, and how they actually are on a day-to-day also trying to improve their own situation in terms of activities and in terms of the challenges that they're facing. So we provide information, we provide intelligence, and so apart from the Spotify that I'm showing here now, we're aiming to continue to support also people in their homes with their specific activities, for instance, also in relation to identity and access management. So part of the different series, this is now number 5. We have started the sessions with one of the colleagues of Martin today, Nick from Forgerock, and then we had a couple of other sessions very interesting and talking about different developments of identity and access management in the cloud. Today, delivering at the speed of business is the title, and hopefully you will be seeing some best practices and use cases that Martin Wouters from Forgerock is going to present us. A couple of words about LSEC. We are a not-for-profit organization. We've been incorporated about 2 decades ago, part of the University of Leuven as a spin-off. And today we bring together the expertise from our members, namely cybersecurity, identity and access management, and information security specialists, bringing them to different vertical sectors to try to see where the challenges are in relation to their day-to-day needs of information security. And there we see, of course, the transformations towards cloud, towards IoT, the digital transformation in general. And we also definitely see what the impact is within our business and organizations that we have as end users, members. So about 15,000 of them we reach out to. Those include banks, those include retail organizations, and also the manufacturing and transport industries. In all of these domains, we have an insight in how actually the world is moving very fast, and where challenges are being seen in terms of the cybersecurity components. And I cannot reiterate this enough. And cybersecurity for robotics is a major one, but for instance, also cybersecurity for artificial intelligence. And we actually also do quite a lot in terms of enterprise security architectures, where we see that there's a lot needed for integration with backend systems. Yesterday, we started with a new series of webinars on manufacturing transformation. In this case, best practices for condition-based maintenance. So those are being published online as well. And there, amongst others, we saw the necessity for integration with, for instance, REST and APIs, but also the more and more use of JSON and over different types of protocols and platforms. Here we talked about MQT. And I think in all of these platforms, we do recognize that there's quite a lot in challenge in terms of identity and access management integration. Another one of those is the participation that we have, and where we try to provide intelligence in cybersecurity and into the way that these things need to further evolve when it comes to factories and to the pathways of different factories, how they need to migrate towards digital. And so here we can see that from the past, many of those manufacturing organizations are still at a very basic level of connectivity. They try to integrate different systems, ERP systems, manufacturing execution systems, SCADA PLCs, and integrate those with IoT, and then facing many different challenges on how to integrate all of these different data topics. So that's where we're working on in the sidelines, not only in the manufacturing, also in banking, also in retail. And so we hope to be able to see you there. And so this is one of the activities that we do as a digital security catalyst. Next to the webinars, next to the information and dissemination, we work on active industrial projects where we bring together our expertise. And then it results in platforms like this, where we basically have built different components. We use dashboards and we use IoT to bring everything together in one package, really to support the digitalization of, for instance, in this case, small and medium-sized companies in manufacturing that not always see the challenges upfront. Today, we call it in-depth use cases of modern IAM. That's how we started. Martin transformed it into delivering at the speed of business. So Martin, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine. It's a nice day to do an Insight web conference. It's beautiful weather outside.
Indeed, it is.
All right. Let me take over.
Yeah. I actually noticed that my slides weren't changing at all, so I'll pick those up later.
Yeah, it's what you said earlier. Zoom changed some things again overnight. So.
Yep. We just learned by experience, and we'll have to see how it. But yeah, I guess we'll pick up on the slides. They will become later available. Yes. So, Martin, you're going to tell us about modern identity management use cases. How are you doing within Forgerock these days?
Well, we're doing fine. So I think I've noticed a lot of articles pop up on LinkedIn as well. That people are talking about the growth in the field of identity and access management, especially now in these days where the move towards a digital environment becomes a necessity more than just something that's nice to have. So yeah, it's going great. A lot of interest. So,
yeah, I think that people are really experiencing today what it is to be digital and are facing the customer interactions that sometimes are a bit a challenge. I'll leave it up to you for the next 40 minutes something. Please indulge us with delivering at the speed of business.
All right. Okay, so thank you, Ulrich. Maybe a little bit quick word about myself for the people who don't know me. Maarten Wouters. I'm a principal solution architect at Forgerock. I have about 12 years of experience in the field of identity and access management. That is quite a long time already. In my eyes, I feel old. But I've dabbed into different kind of technologies. So I've worked with other vendors as well. I've worked with different kind of companies in different verticals. And what I'm going to try to do today is to explain a little bit on why we call this modern identity and access management. So just a quick word to make sure that we're all familiar with the terminology. And what the pain points are that we see on the move towards this new modern identity and access management. And then, of course, the key use cases that we see popping up that are very common in a modern identity and access management world. And then we have some time for Q&A. So Ulrich asked me to do an in-depth view of the use cases, which can be a bit tough because you will get into technology straight away. So I was trying to keep it more business-centric, but of course, during Q&A, if there are any specific questions, I'm very happy to go a little bit more into the technical depth of it. So this is a bit of a five-step imperative why you would need digital identity. So these things are very actual in the current environment that we all live in. Everything is connected. We notice now that we need to connect everyone through digital media or digital identities to be able to communicate with each other. Users have been spoiled the last couple of years by companies such as Apple and Google that can deliver very delightful user experiences. So we see that also everyone in any which scenario is expecting this delightful experience to propagate through all these things. So not only for consumers, not only for the millennials that want to access social media, but also for people that are in the workspace. Of course, this is probably one of the oldest reasons why we would dab into identity and access management. It's about security. So these secure interactions are still a necessity, but they have to align with this delightful experience. So it has to be secure, but it has to be easy and fast, frictionless, whatever word you want to put on it. It's very, very important. Also, we've seen the last couple of years the rise of data privacy laws, not only in Europe, also in the US, that become very important for our user transactions and just trying to store this information in a secure way and accessing it from anywhere possible. And also on regulatory compliancy. So that's a bit of the the rules that we have to abide to, which are also, of course, very important. If there weren't any rules, then everyone would do whatever they would like. It's not good. What do we see? Okay, this is a little bit, of course, a little bit biased, but just to give you an idea on what the experience is on older identity and access management scenarios and products and technology, is that back in the day you had siloed identities. So there was a lack of a single view of a customer or of an employee. They had identities left, right, and center, and they were not converged together. Security is outdated. Of course, security always needs to be updated. You can tell by the fact that Zoom got an update apparently as well. So security is very imperative in this. And also the extensibility of a product. So we move quite fast in the technology field. So the fact that you should be able to extend this functionality, extend this platform is very important. Scalability is also an issue, even in the employee field. So you have companies in Belgium and in the Netherlands that are maximum like 20, 30,000 people. But you also want to scale, for example, for IoT, for devices. They also become identities in your platform. And then you're talking about a lot more identities. So scalability is an issue, especially on, I would say, the more legacy IAM platforms. You need a flexible solution. You need a solution that can both tailor for the old legacy platforms that you still have and that you need, and also for newer technologies. So in that regards, we have something called Identity Fabric that will come back into the presentation as well. And then also, of course, compliancy. Compliancy changes. You need to be able to comply to the newest regulations. Okay, this is a bit of a transition, but identity is essential for your digital transformation. I think that's very clear on what is stated here. You need to know who, what, when, and why they are accessing your resources, which is basically the entire premise of this presentation. So we will go into these, of course, in depth during the use cases. So I think about 10 years ago, when I started out in identity and access management, there was a very clear differentiation between what we call customer-facing identity and access management and workforce identity and access management. So these were typically two completely different fields, two completely different technologies that were used to make it happen. And they usually had also nothing to do with each other. They were not connected in any which way. They were completely separate. By typical design, a customer-facing identity and access management would be something that was very marketing-driven, and a workforce, of course, very business rule-orientated, based on specific protocols and procedures within the company. Now we see in a modern approach of identity and access management, we see these two things come together. So consumer or customer and workforce, they're actually not very dissimilar. So they have quite similar use cases that need to be complied to. And also it's the same kind of user. So the customer is also someone's workforce and they expect a similar experience. So millennials are very demanding. They want this delightful experience to be also in their workforce. So you would see all these different use cases come together. A couple of them that are very obvious is, of course, single sign-on. You want to have borderless access, which is very apparent now. You don't want to connect over a VPN to anything these days. You just want to be connected. You want also to access your customer resources as you would want to connect to Amazon or something like that. So it needs to be all easy to access. And of course, it needs to take into account the privacy of the user. This slide, so this word identity fabric, I think it's originated from KuppingerCole, which is one of these analyst companies that do analysis over all these different kind of platforms that we have. And identity fabric means that there is identity between both the old way of working, so to connect to legacy applications, to connect to legacy systems, and also to connect to newer devices and newer services. So as Ulrich mentioned, apparently you had a presentation yesterday where they were saying JSON API RESTful interfaces. Well, that's indeed the newer approach of these things, is to all do it over API based. But you have legacy applications that might require some kind of reverse proxy interaction or some kind of middle layer in between to be able to interact with it. So you need to support both, because you are quite sure that if you're going to migrate or you're going to implement a modern identity and access management, you will still need to support these legacy systems. If not, then of course it's easier to do it, but 99% of the time you will still need to support legacy platforms. Okay, so let's go a little bit into the use cases. So just a word, what I did with this presentation, of course with the help of some people at Forgerock, we tried to get some idea on why we selected these use cases, because we have a lot of use cases, of course. You need to make a selection. So I tried to create or select some use cases that we see across the requests that we get from our customers, that we see a lot. Might not be in the exact form as I depicted them, but they're quite similar. So just bear with me, I will run through them together. So one of the category of use cases that we detected that was important to zoom in on was about attracting and retaining new users. This sounds like a very customer-facing identity and access management use case, and it is. But it's also usable for workforce, because you want to be able to onboard workforces as well in an easy way, in a quick way, and work from there. So these are based on some statistical studies that I don't know we got from somewhere, but apparently 97% of all the users would rather not complete a complete form on a non-mobile device, meaning that if you are presented with the form where you have to fill in 20 lines, people are zoned out and be like, oh, okay, never bother, I will go somewhere else. And of course, the 27% will abandon these forms because they are too long or too cumbersome to fill in. Also, 91% of the people that were interviewed prefer brands providing personal recommendations. So we actually like the fact that they're tracking information on us, that they know what we like, that they know what we Google, for example, or stuff that we want to see. And also by 2022, that's a lot of twos, digital experts say that there will be 20% more revenue than those with a poor customer experience. So it's becoming a business driver to get this flow in order. So it's very important to have a think about that. Always, for example, I always take this example, everyone has a Google account. Always think about stuff like how do you register for a Google account, or how do you register for Spotify, for example, or something like that. It's very easy, and if they would want to ask you extra additional questions, they will do so after you registered in the beginning, which we will also go into. So the first use case, the first journey I selected, and you can see here it's very very business like. It's not a technical use case in this case. It's just like, okay, I want a user to be able to register as quickly as possible, and I want to be able to validate it. For example, in this case, Amy is browsing to a company website, that can be a web shop or anything like that, and they are asked to self-register. We've done this as well on, for example, a banking scenario where you can actually self-register online on a bank. And then, of course, you could log in with social media. In this picture, they picked Facebook. But for example, what's also possible is to do it with, for example, your Google account, which is usually more verified already, or your Apple account, which contains a lot more information. And you know that if you have an Apple account, you have a credit card information that's verified and stuff like that. So, but you can connect to those platforms using social media, which will create a quick profile without too much hassle. If you do it on a mobile, you usually don't even have to fill out anything. You just have to press a button. It will go to Facebook, get your information over OAuth or OpenID Connect. And you can have the user confirm a user agreement or a policy, privacy policy statement. And then you can ask for a password. Now this step, of course, it's very traditional. You can ask for a password, but you can fill out anything in this gap. So if you say, okay, I don't want them to fill out a password immediately. I just want them to select a way of authentication, for example, using FIDO and your smartphone or something like that. It's also possible. It's perfectly done there. And then you can ask for a verification. So if you obtain an email address from anywhere in this scenario, you want to be able to verify that. This is a very simple scenario. Nothing much has happened. For example, if I go back to my example and say, okay, this is, for example, registering for a bank, I wouldn't be able to do anything because they just have my email address and my proposed name. If I was not using a fake profile or anything, but then they wouldn't be able to do much. So that's where progressive profile kicks in. So imagine that you registered for this bank using your social media, right? And you want to, for example, then apply for a bank account. So you want to be able to, at that point, verify your identity, say that you are exactly who you say you are before you go and obtain this bank account. And in this step, for example, you can gather more information progressively. That's what the name says, progressive profiling. And you can allow for a tailored experience because you know more about this person in a more gradual way. So this is an example of progressive profiling, which is becoming very important. I think it's also on the most of the web shops that you encounter. They will always ask you to make an account just using an email address and a password. And then when you order something, they will ask you for your credit card details and your address and stuff like that, but not on the first moment you get on there. This could also be, for example, a use case for if you want to access government information, where, for example, the government will allow you to just log in and just create an own account. But if you want to, for example, access documents that you need for applying for something, they would ask you to verify using your EID or something like that. It would be perfectly the same kind of scenario that you could implement here. Okay, so that was a little bit about user registration, which I think is very important in this day and age. Again, also very tailored to customer facing, but also not unimportant for workforce. Now this secure authentication is a use case or use cases that would apply for both. So simplified and secure authentication. I remember I did a study once at a customer, I think it must have been 6 or 7 years ago, and they wanted me to investigate what multi-factor authentication method would be the best one to use for them. Now, I think 6 or 7 years ago, not everyone had a smartphone, so you couldn't say, okay, you have to log in using a soft token on your smartphone. It was super difficult to provide hardware tokens to everyone. So it was incredibly difficult to make that happen. So the best solution there would have been have several methods and make the user choose one. And that's a bit more where we're going with this now. So especially on authentication, we have a problem with passwords. Passwords are a little bit outdated. We still use it and probably will still use it for a long time. But if you can do something else, please do something else, because passwords are very hackable. We have something called passwordless authentication, which is everyone is familiar with. It just means that you log in with your smartphone or whatever multi-factor from the first time. But you also have usernameless login. For example, using FIDO2 on your smartphone or on your browser that supports it, you could use FIDO2 to log in onto any platform just by verifying your identity through a fingerprint scanner on your phone or on your MacBook or whatever. So one of these methods that I described was that this is also something that I could relate to. Back in the day, you had very static rules on when to do step-up authentication. So step-up authentication, for people who are not aware of what that means, it's when you ask a user to log in with a stronger factor than he was before. So for example, username password could be the first factor, multi-factor or a token could be the second factor. Now it was very static. It used to be very static. When you were accessing a resource, they would ask you for the multi-factor when you were requesting a resource that was of a higher security level, and then you were prompted for this multi-factor. Nowadays, we want to use contextual based risk to assess if a user should do a step up or not. For example, I could check the location. Is this user usually logging in from this location? Is he logging in from somewhere else? Based on that, I could ask the user to do a multi-factor authentication instead of just username and password. Again, also for that same reason, I don't want to bother him all the time if I know that he's working from his home, he verified it already in the morning, and I just want him to consume these services and not be bothered with it. But in any case, you want to give the user a choice. So whatever he has, he needs to be able to get a choice. It's similar to what Google does, right? When they ask you, okay, we need to send you an OTP. You want it via SMS, you want it via email to another email address, of course, than your Gmail. But you can make a choice, which is similar to this one. So you make a choice and then you provide the OTP and you're logged in. Now, to take it one step further than that, you want the user to decide and save these preferences on his user profile, on his self-service profile. So you actually want, and this is also related to this delightful experience that we were talking about. Users don't want to be bothered with the same screens over and over again to say, okay, I want to log in with my SMS or whatever. No, they want it to be saved. So in this case, the user will save his preference, and then from that moment on, he will always use this method that he selected. You can go even further than that and say, okay, we don't want the user to make too much choices. We want to measure if a user is using this method a lot, or a certain subset of users is using this method a lot. So we want to be able to measure what kind of experience the user is expecting. You could measure if they are not going through this entire login procedure, which means that it's too cumbersome and they will not use your service. Or you could say, okay, this one is the most popular one, let's focus on that and stuff like that. So it's very, very important to be able to do that on an identity and access management platform these days. You want to be able to measure these experiences and these user journeys. Of course, my presentation would not be complete if I didn't talk about AI. So, of course, if you talk about security these days, the major buzzword is AI. So you want to be able to automate a lot of these things. So, for example, I mentioned this context-aware authentication. You want to be able to grab this context of a user. Well, this context, you can make some assumptions on location or IP address, all spoofable, I know. But the easiest way to do this is by leveraging AI to measure what the user is doing and to be able to detect if a user is giving abnormal behavior, yes or no. It doesn't only account for the security, by the way. AI can also help in your identity and access management to automate, and I will get back to that in a minute. And then also, of course, it's very important to maintain a strong user access hygiene. So it means 34% of the people apparently in this statistical investigation, they had internal actors with too much access. So you want to be able to revoke this access if necessary. Think about identity governance. But you also want to automate that because you don't want someone to rely on completely on a person, on a human. So you can reduce the cost of a breach by automating security. Hackers are very inventive people. Security consultants cost a lot of money. By automating this, by creating an AI, you make it difficult for hackers to compromise your security, and at the same time also reduce the costs. So it's very important to leverage that capability within your environment. And of course, also just nice to mention that the average cost of a breach to an organization is 3.9 million, I think it's dollars. But in any case, it's a lot of money. And then also not to talk about the reputation damage. So you might want to be able to leverage that, remediate that, sorry, before it comes to a breach. So, for example, one story that you could leverage on this artificial intelligence is when, for example, our user Bob logs in with a new device. So Bob has bought a new iPhone and is logging in from this new iPhone, and the system detects that it's a new device. So I don't know if any one of you have, for example, ever logged in on Facebook using a different device. The thing gets notifications, you get a code that you have to scan or type in. So these things are also detecting some anomalies or some weird behavior and try to leverage that. This is something similar. So you want to notify the user, for example, send them an email saying, hey, we detected another attempt for logging in. This is the location, this is the device ID. But then you would want to, of course, when Bob confirms that this is his device, you don't want him to get that notification all the time. So you want it to happen once and then save it and create a profile for that. So for example, in this case, you want him to verify it by prompting him to do an additional factor authentication, for example, through FIDO2 web authentication. You can also try to detect fraudulent activity. So imagine that in this case, Bob is always logging in from the same location or a similar location, and he changes his and during his session, during his logged in session, he changes location. This is also, by the way, very important if you're thinking about, and I haven't mentioned that word yet, so I will now. The continuous authentication and authorization of a user. That is very important in modern identity and access management systems, is that you can verify someone's session or verify someone's login and identity at all times. So in this case, for example, he detects that this user changed IP address, and then he will revoke his access. So we will revoke his access token and say, hey, I'm logging off this user, this is weird, let him log in again. So you're actually, instead of being just time-based, you're actually going on it based on the change of his location, and then prompting him to log in again with an additional factor. So this also becomes a very important use case, whereas in the past we would obtain a session. This session would keep for X amount of time on my computer, and there is no way of verifying it at that point in time whether or not some of my rights or some of my access would be revoked in this automatic way. So AI can help in these scenarios as well. And then also something that I didn't have a nice blocked slide for, but I definitely want to mention. So not only can you use this to do help in the authentication journey, but you can also use it, AI, to leverage what we would call predictive identity governance and automation. So where you actually, if for example, a new employee starts in a company, you can actually predict what kind of roles and responsibilities that he needs based on his function, based on a colleague of his that has similar rights or something like that, to automate, to make it easier. You can also use it to do the actual attestation and reattestation process, where you want to mark users or specific people or specific roles that have a higher risk, and give it a risk score, and make sure that the person that does the manual governance process is alerted on the ones that are the most important. Because if you have to do 200 of them, of course you're not going to read every 200 of them, or you might, but it's very rare. So this will also help you in your workforce identity and access management, which is really important and is going to be more important in the future. So I don't know how much time I still have left. Well, I went through it quite quickly. So I think we have quite some time left for some Q&A. Again, these are just a subset of scenarios that I've put forward in this slideshow. One that I did not mention, but it's also something that will probably be a future use case in identity and access management in a modern way, is the one where you connect IoT towards your platform. So when you want to connect your car that is self-driving and have that self-driving car have an identity, to be able to, for example, charge itself on a mobile charging station without having to interact with the card or typing in a code or anything like that, but just allowing that car to be an identity and have some rights and access rights towards these platforms, for example. All right, okay, Eddie?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Yes, indeed. You went quickly, which is fine. Of course, it gives us a bit more time for Q&A. We have one question coming in from Ivo Verstralen. Good morning, and thanks for that. Ivo's asking, risk-based strong authentication is largely behavior-based. This requires storage and analysis of the behavior and locations of employees and or customers. This is personal information subject to GDPR. And which restrictions and precautions must the customer respect to implement such behavior-based analysis?
Well, that's a good question. And actually, yesterday, I talked to my US colleague about this, and I said, I'm definitely going to get a question based on this contextual AI stuff and privacy. I said, because it's Belgium, and we are very concerned about this. Yeah, that's a very good question. Thanks for that. Pretty much without going into the technical details, because I'm not the AI expert, but these platforms that do this contextual analysis, they are not really storing any identity information. They're obfuscating this, or they're creating information, but it's not directly relatable to a specific user. So this AI platform that is living in the cloud, this machine, will not be storing any personal identifiable information. Of course, if you're doing context-based authentication, where you just store this information as an attribute on the user and use that, for example, where is his last 5 locations, or was his last 4 IP addresses or something like that, then of course, yes, you need to be able to do that in a secure way and use that information according to the GDPR guidelines of personal identifiable information. But I think that's also one of the reasons why AI is becoming popular, is because it takes away this concern about personal identifiable information, and it just says this AI will do the thinking, and it will not store any of that information. But it is a concern that we hear a lot, actually, also from people that are interested in AI services around this. They all ask, like, where is this data going? Who is watching this? Who is managing this AI and stuff like that? So yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to go to let you off the hook on this one here, because I think it's rather important. Well, it doesn't only relate, of course, to the AI part, the analytics part, because you do collect personal information in terms of the person, and then potentially in terms of its behavior, if you want to connect it to the person itself. So you'll require some specific data privacy impact analysis to understand really what that means and how you need to work with the personal data, in this case coming from that user. So I think the question is also more related to who would be then in this case controller, processor, and where is the compliance towards GDPR.
Exactly.
Is that something that is being done in this case, for instance, by Forgerock, if you would provide the engines for that type of analytics, or is it something which is done on premise and by the company itself, just using the tools, if you do not do any cloud processing of those data? So how does it work in practice?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about what Forgerock does in that. So of course, these scenarios that I showed you are all you can all do that in the Forgerock product. And one of these aspects is, of course, our AI.
We could have guessed. We could have guessed.
It would be really weird if I showed you something that we couldn't do. No, but something very important is that
be conducted mainly. It's peer-to-peer interviews. Or
oh,
sorry for that. Yeah, that's some strange thing that's happening there. So yeah, please go ahead, Martin. Sorry.
No, so this AI engine that we have currently, it's based in the US, to be quite honest. Now it's based in the US, but I know that we are going to build, or in any case, have it also available in the European data centers. But it's all, in this case, it's all hosted on Google Cloud Platform. So yeah, Google Cloud is, in this case, the, what is it? The processor? Yeah, the data processor.
Could be, yeah.
So they're abiding towards, or they should abide towards these regulations. So in this, I don't think that the customer on its own is responsible for any of these steps. Unless they, of course, save this information on a different platform.
It's maybe an interesting topic to further deep into in one of our next sessions. So normally we have at noon also our GDPR sessions, data protection. So I think it's something useful to further dive into on how this could actually work when we're talking specifically about those types of behavioral analytics, because it's a topic, of course, that's not only related to this type of platform or to Forgerock. It's something that we see coming up quite often. We've already had quite some discussion and debate about, for instance, things like biometrics, where that type of processing also happens. So I think there's a lot that can be debated and discussed about this.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And this is not going to go away anytime soon. So it's not something that's it's going to become a choice. I think a lot of services are going to run on AI, especially around security, because it's cost effective. So I think there will have to be some very specific guidelines on how and where this information is stored. Definitely.
I see you every once in a while looking a bit to the screen because there's things popping up likely. So there's Daniel here asking how the IoT, identity and access management, can be integrated. And so I think you showed how what the vision is behind the integration of IoT and the devices, how they should be considered also having their own identity. I don't think that you mentioned specifically that would be an identity and access management specific application, if I understood correctly. So yes, please.
Yeah, Forgerock stands on that, and I think that's also a bit of the evolution in that field, is that the IoT device itself becomes an identity. That's also part of the reason, for example, why we see that older identity and access management systems have problem with scaling. Because it's not only one human or one user, it's one user and 6 or 7 devices. Maybe there is a connection to a car or something else that has a sensor that is web enabled. It can be anything. So it becomes quite extensive. But yes, these IoT devices we're aiming from our architecture's point of view. These things have an identity and have certain ways of authenticating and authorizing themselves towards other platforms and systems.
Yeah, so sometimes they do indeed a sort of self-announce, which is from security perspective not always that great, as we already understood a couple of times. They open up different types of protocols, and which means that it's also quite easy for anybody from the outside to find those devices. So that's not really what you want. Sometimes they simply open up to the internet, which is even worse. So that self announcement, if you like, of those devices is definitely one thing. Now, it could be also an interesting topic that we can dive into in another session, specifically when we talk about industry. We had last year at our IoT conference, one of your top guys from the Nordics coming to talk about this in depth and in detail, specifically also on automotive. So I think that was an interesting talk. So maybe we should invite him back in again here as well in the near future. But in relation to the IoT connection, if I dive a little bit deeper there, so you say that the devices would also be considered having their own identity. In this case, how can they be managed? Would they also then be managed from the same interfaces? And do you consider to connect a device to a user or to a specific entity, which could be then, for instance, a factory or a house or maybe an enterprise on different layers? So, and any basic thoughts there?
Yeah, so I forgot to mention that one, so thanks. So what we used to see in identity and access management was what we call role-based access control. Then you had attribute-based access control, and now we have something called relationship-based access control, which actually means that we define in our identity management platform, we define managed objects like a user, like for example, a factory can be a managed object. And then we can define a car that can be a managed object, or a bank account can be a managed object. And it's the relationship between those different objects that defines the access model. So for example, I can be in a relationship with another user, for example, my employee or my wife or a kid or whatever, but I can also be in relation to a car, saying I'm the user of this car or I'm the owner of this car, but I do not necessarily have to be the owner of this car. Someone else can be the owner of this car. It can be a leased car. And by creating a model like that, you create a model where it's very easy to have a dynamic way of this role-based, very, very dynamic way of creating this mapping. And it's based a little bit on the concept what Facebook uses as a graph engine. So to create like almost a neural view of someone's relation towards other people and towards groups and other elements in this part. So yes, in this case, you would create a managed object as a car or as a device or as something, and create the relation between those objects.
Is there a specific example that you can give that you already applied this into, or is it work in progress?
Not on top of my head. I know some of our customers. We have customers in the automotive industry that use our software incorporated into cars. I don't know if I can name drop any of them, but for example, then if you're logged in with your connected drive, or what's it called? Not saying any names, but then you're actually connected towards this identity and access management platform that is connected to your user and is connected to your car and is connected to whatever else information, and all the different sensors in your car are also connected to it. So they can read out like, hey, you need some maintenance. They send you a mail to say, hey, it's time for your maintenance or something like that. So these things, yeah, they live and they work alongside your identity in this case. And of course, if you change car, which I saw a demonstration of, that doesn't always apply. But if you have an app, for example, that this car is no longer your car, but is someone else's car, and so it shouldn't be connected anymore. So these identities can switch. So very interesting.
Yeah. So this was one of the slides I was talking about earlier, but that apparently didn't appear. So I think this could be an interesting one, at least to look into. To look into in the next couple of weeks, maybe, to see if we can definitely use this as an example, and then we come back in one of the next webinars to see how it works when we connected this, and also because these types of devices we deploy. In some cases, 5,000, 6,000 different installations into one factory, and so managing those is actually becoming quite challenging, because of course every of those single devices needs to be controlled in a very similar way, and that sometimes makes it a bit challenging and hard, of course, for those people that need to be in response of the systems, not so much of the identities, but in control of these systems.
And these systems will need to be able to interact with each other. To give an example, we worked out some conceptual idea. It doesn't exist yet, but imagine that you book a flight for anywhere, and you say, okay, I will depart from Brussels tomorrow, and I'm in the airport from 10 to 6, something like that. And so you book your tickets, so your identity is linked to your ticket. You go into the airport, you scan your ticket. At that point in time, the airport knows, not the airline, the airport knows, Martin has arrived with his tickets, and it's his device. So I will give his device internet access, free internet access for the remainder of his stay inside the airport. And from the time that I do the boarding, my internet connection is lost, and they remove me from the system. That's in a scenario where all these things need to be integrated, or at least be able to talk to each other in a secure way, of course. But that means that I have a relationship with this airport, but it goes away at the moment where I get onto my flight. So yeah, these are, and these sensors and these IoT devices will become a very, very big part of this ecosystem, definitely.
Okay, great. Coming back to the main topic that you were starting on today, the contextual authentication, progressive profiling. I think some of the users also have a bit of questions on how it actually integrates in their current environment. Do they need to have a complete Forgerock environment in order to be able to do this? Can this also be in a step-up approach? And so how does it integrate in reality, and how even for those organizations which are now looking into transforming their customer platforms, how easily can this be plugged in, if you like? Is this something that's quite feasible, and can there later on be additional components being added to this? Or how would we need to see that being integrated?
Well,
you promised some more technical in depth. So
yes. So one of the slides I had there was about identity fabric, which could clearly states, of course, very conceptually, like you integrate with modern identities and also with legacy. So it's very important to also support the things that you already have, but you want to leverage this new technology. So, for example, my experience when we're doing migrations. You have to have at some point, you have 2 identity and access management environments, the new one and the old one, and you want to be able to authenticate towards the new one, because that's where you can do the contextual based authentication or the newer authentication. And then you just want to get the session on the old platform, because it's just a slave to your system. And then this session will live for these applications that are still on the old platform, while you can, the user experience has changed dramatically. And in the background, this user doesn't care if he has 2 sessions or not. It's temporarily, that's not a problem. But yeah, this coexistence and this slow migrations is super important, because you won't be able to just say, okay, I buy this new software, switch it off, this old one, and then say, okay, let's hope and pray that this will work. But it's whatever you see, what you show on the front end. So whatever the user has on his experience by logging in, that can change overnight. If you have the, of course, you need to design the screens and have some nice view or layout, but the technology is there. You have it. And I think that's a very powerful way of dealing with migration towards newer platforms.
Yeah, isn't that also something that really makes this modern identity and access management to be really relevant today? Because that's probably where I see that the biggest advantages of identity management, and the fact that we talk about it again. I think a couple of years ago, they were quite challenging activities to do a transformation. It was basically like transforming into enterprise resource, or doing things like changing to Euro. So huge projects, SAP integration style. I think that what you show here today, and also what before Sven and Wart have been showing, is the power of the technologies as a service. They can be plugged in, they can be easily integrated, maybe also a bit harder to manage, but still. But it probably requires a little bit less of heavy duty preparation work than it has been before. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, so that's exactly, simplicity is a key word here. So you're right. I can imagine projects 6-7 years ago, a migration project, it would take 6 months to a year. Or
they're still
longer.
ongoing. They're still ongoing.
They're still ongoing. Yes, that's like a pain in the thing, and it takes super long. And now people don't have the time for it. They don't have the patience for it. They want to be able to change it now. So you see a lot of integrations indeed with cloud solutions, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a cloud solution. As long as the platform itself is easily deployable, easy to manage, and you can plug in these older legacy systems in it, or at least be able to make sure that you can still log into the old platform, because you don't want the customer to be able to pay for 2 different IAM solutions, because they need to license them both, because they need to coexist. So you need to have a migration, but you can have a quick win by putting them there, putting the new platform there, and making the other one a slave, and then just say, okay, look, we have this all new user journey. The user registration looks different, user login looks different, and that's what your users will see. All the rest is technicality, but the users will see this change immediately, and that's really important.
So then it doesn't have to be a pain in the dinges anymore. It becomes an easy to use technology and tool. But a new pain in the dinges then will become definitely the GDPR compliance, because you're treating personal data, of course, of people. So which means that we'll have to talk about this thing at another point in time. Okay, Martin, we're 2 minutes before 10. Was there anything else that you wanted to convey to our group of users and to our participants here today, and also in the future, of course, because this is being recorded? Anything that we should consider?
Yeah, I thank you very much for listening, first of all. And second of all, if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn or via mail. I'm more than happy to listen to use cases and stuff. I'm very enthusiastic about the identity and access management field, so it's always interesting to hear new stories. So yeah, and as said, the IoT use case, that's something that we will try to, we can definitely go into a little bit more depth with my colleague Stein on a different session, definitely. So
yes, Stein, that was indeed our speaker from last year. So okay, great. Thank you very much, Martin. So that leaves me then to just pick a couple of things up here. So I hope that we can go a little bit deeper here and see how this works, maybe also in terms of its how it works in terms of contextual authentication, because I think some of these devices actually could also be using this. So for next week, all of the participants here are very much invited to participate. We'll be having Hendrik Parmentier from PwC talking about security culture. And then the week afterwards, we'll be having, happy to have Wouter Janssen from Accentrix talking about governance in identity and access. And then hopefully a little bit afterwards, we'll be seeing then maybe you or one of your colleagues back again on one of our GDPR sessions, Martin.
Yep.
So in any case, for those of you who are interested, we will also continue next week. This is still saying the one from past Tuesday, but we'll continue with our network and information security activities, which is more industrial security. Next week, we'll be having an interesting talk from Ralph from GData on ransomware in industrial networks. Still very active, those nifty malwares. And then shortly afterwards, we'll be having a land sweeper on how basically industrial devices can be discovered into those systems. So it's going a little bit deeper into the self-advocating devices. Here we are going to use some technologies to try to sweep the networks, finding what devices are there, and then hopefully also integrating them obviously within the identity and access environment. So we'll continue with the sessions in those. And then next Tuesday, and this is also talking about the previous one, but still Koen will be also the one talking about 5G next week. I'll be showing some real 5G use cases, also using cybersecurity in the baseline, mainly coming from Asia Pacific. Some industrial cases, some retail cases. So definitely something to look out for. That will be happening on Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. So those of you like today who would like to participate in an early morning with your breakfast and coffee, please join in. And on June 9th, the best hacker in the world that we have here in Belgium, Inti Curriculera from Integrity will be talking about some of the ethical hackers' perspectives in weakest links. We also have our data protection webinars. The one for today, unfortunately, has been postponed to a couple of weeks, but we'll be doing next week a very interesting talk on data protection with our colleagues from the Netherlands, CIP, which is the Center for Information Security and Personal Data Protection, working with about 700 public authorities and seeing not only from the public authority side, but also from the retail and the business side, what some of the challenges are that companies and organizations are being faced with on a day-to-day basis, implementing GDPR, trying to be compliant to GDPR. So the experience, if you like, from the Netherlands, which will then bring us some interesting experiences and best practices for the week afterwards. We'll be having a panel with some very top speakers from Belgium and use cases from, for instance, Telenet, and also accompanied by some people from the Data Protection Authority. So in the meantime, thank you very much for listening in, also for replaying. And if you would like to re-see the presentation from Martin, then you'll be probably able to do that as of tomorrow and just rewinding everything. And otherwise, Martin, thanks again for joining in at this early morning. It's been a great time having you as usual. And so hopefully we'll be seeing each other again live in a couple of months.
Yeah, let's hope so. Speak to you soon.
Have a good morning and see you soon again. Bye.
Bye.